When night first spoke. Before the written word, before the wheel, before even the first village fires smoked against the dawn, there was only the night. A vast, unbroken blackness that pressed against the minds of our earliest ancestors. The night was not silent. It murmured through the wind, creaked through branches, and rustled with unseen life. And in that ancient darkness, humanity did something extraordinary. It began to imagine. At first, it was not religion. It was survival. The darkness was both the mother and the devourer, a living thing that needed to be appeased. The flicker of a flame became more than warmth, it was a fragile boundary between the known and the unknowable. Around that glow, small bands of humans began to whisper. They gave names to the forces they feared. They saw faces in the void. And from those faces, the first spirits were born. Archaeologists have uncovered sites like Blombo's cave in South Africa, nearly 100,000 years old, where ochre markings and carefully arranged shells suggest ritual, not mere habit. These patterns were not art for beauty's sake, they were symbols meant to bind something unseen. Scholars still debate whether these markings were the earliest form of language or something older, a visual incantation, meant to make the invisible visible. Imagine the world then, the crackle of the fire, the hiss of embers, the eyes in the darkness. When a hunter failed to return, his name was not forgotten, it was whispered, softly, as though he might still be listening. And perhaps, in those whispered names, something stirred. The line between memory and invocation blurred. A dead man's shadow could be summoned not through blood, but through remembrance. Across continents, from the icy plains of Siberia to the savannas of Africa, the pattern repeats. The shaman, part healer, part magician, part storyteller, becomes the bridge. The first occultist. When lightning struck the same hill twice, when a child's fever broke after a chant, people began to see order in chaos. That was the first great secret, meaning hidden within the unpredictable. Even now, we find traces of those early mysteries. Animal bones buried beneath hearthstones, ochre circles drawn under sleeping skins. A kind of proto-language of power, where symbol and belief fused. It wasn't science, not yet, but it wasn't blind faith either. It was something else entirely, a human experiment in controlling the unknown through pattern. One unearthed artifact, a small carved figurine from Hohlfels in Germany, dating back over 30,000 years, still bears the marks of fingers pressing intention into stone. Was it fertility? Magic? Art? Scholars still debate whether these carvings were offerings or talismans. But all agree on one thing, they were acts of faith, not in gods, but in the possibility that human will could change the fabric of the world. As the night deepened, so did our imagination. Every strange sound was an omen, every dream a message. Slowly, the world filled with spirits, ancestors, and hidden laws. The occult was not yet a system, it was a survival mechanism, an instinct to understand what reason could not. And maybe that instinct never truly left us. We still look into the dark, the night sky, the deep ocean, the unexplained noise in an empty room, and whisper questions. The same questions asked by those who first spoke to the dark: who is there? What watches us? What answers back? This is where the story begins, not with gods or demons, but with the human mind, trembling before the unknown, learning to listen to its own imagination. The first ritual was not carved in stone, it was spoken softly, around a fire, when night first spoke back. The fire circle's secret. The oldest temples were not built from stone, nor marked with hieroglyphs. They were circles of warmth amid the cold, glowing in the breath of wind and wood smoke, the fire itself. For tens of thousands of years, before the first city, before the first god had a name, the flame was our teacher and our mirror. We forget now how absolute darkness once was. When the sun vanished, it took the world with it. The fire brought it back, a miniature sun at the heart of the night. To feed it, protect it, and watch it dance was a kind of worship. The fire consumed everything, the broken bone, the fallen leaf, the sacrifice. But what it gave back was stranger: smoke that rose like a spirit, light that revealed faces shifting in shadow. It was here that the first rituals of transformation began. At archaeological sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, layers of ash reveal patterned burnings, circles, spirals, repeated placements of bone and clay. These were not random campfires. They were designed, purposeful. Some charred remains show evidence of pigment and stone dust mixed in, suggesting symbolic offerings. Were these meals for the dead? Or attempts to communicate with something unseen through the flicker of the flame? Scholars still debate whether these early fires were simple gatherings or the first ceremonial rites, moments when the ordinary world melted into the supernatural. Around these flames, language itself evolved. The cadence of chant, the rhythm of storytelling, the spellbinding effect of repetition, all were born in that orange glow. A storyteller could hold a group in silence, breathing in unison, waiting for the next word. That silence, pregnant with belief, was the seed of magic. To name something was to control it, to tell its story was to summon its essence. It was in this liminal space, the place between heat and dark, that the first symbols of power emerged. Firelight cast shadows that looked like animals, spirits, faces. People began to see meaning in coincidence, connection in pattern. The leap from survival to superstition was not far. A spark becomes a sign. The mind begins to weave narratives to make sense of chaos. A curious fact: among many ancient hunter-gatherer groups, ashes were mixed with animal fat and smeared on the skin, both as protection and as ritual. The boundary between the self and the sacred blurred. Fire consumed, but also transformed. It made charcoal and light, both mediums for expression, one solid, one ephemeral. The magician and the artist were born in the same moment. Some anthropologists suggest that around these fires, trance states occurred naturally. The combination of flickering light, rhythmic drumming, and communal breath altered perception. Shadows shifted, shapes became fluid. In that hypnotic state, the mind opened. The fire was not just heat, it was a portal. And those who could navigate its visions became leaders, healers, intermediaries. Every tribe, every small circle, had one, the figure who listened differently. The one who claimed to dream in colors others could not see. The one who could speak to the unseen. They were both revered and feared, because they represented the thin line between sanity and revelation. These were the proto-shamans, the ancestors of every magician, priest, and occultist to come. If we listen closely, the crackle of the fire still speaks that same language: randomness that becomes rhythm, sound that becomes story. The first spells were not written in books, they were breathed into flame. And so, as human gatherings became tradition, and tradition became ritual, the fire circle transformed from survival into ceremony. What began as a defense against darkness became a communion with it. The secret of the fire was simple and eternal: it burned everything, yet gave life. It destroyed, yet revealed. It consumed the world and gave back vision. And in its glow, we saw ourselves, tiny, fearful, and yet somehow, divine. The stones that remember. By the time humanity learned to build with stone, our stories had already taken root in the earth. Across thousands of miles and millennia, something extraordinary began to happen: people started arranging stones into patterns. Not for shelter, not for defense, but for meaning. These circles, alignments, and towering monoliths were not homes. They were memory made solid. The first known of these, at Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, stands at least 11,000 years old, older than Stonehenge, older than the wheel. Its enormous T-shaped pillars are carved with animals, foxes, snakes, vultures. No domestic remains have been found there, no sign of ordinary life. It was not a village. It was a temple. A place where humans gathered not to eat or trade, but to remember. Mainstream archaeology tells us Göbekli Tepe may have been the world's first monumental ritual site, a kind of cosmic observatory where hunter-gatherers, not yet farmers, aligned their world with the heavens. But others whisper of stranger possibilities. The carvings, they say, map not animals, but constellations, the earliest human attempt to translate the sky into stone. Some claim it even records the memory of a cataclysm, a comet that ended the Ice Age. Scholars still debate whether these alignments were coincidence or deliberate cosmic code. What's certain is that something shifted there. Humanity began to treat matter itself as a vessel for the unseen. The ground became sacred, the sky became readable. The magician's impulse, to find pattern and purpose in the natural world, took shape in limestone and dust. As the millennia turned, the practice spread. Karnak in France, Avebury and Stonehenge in Britain, Nabta Playa in Egypt, vast landscapes of stone set to mark solstices, equinoxes, the rising and setting of stars. The effort was immense, the purpose mysterious. No written words explain them. They simply stand, silent, as though waiting for someone to remember what they mean. Imagine a gathering beneath the solstice sun, thousands of years ago. A drumbeat echoes across the plain. The shadows of monoliths stretch like fingers toward one another, perfectly timed with the setting sun. People lift their arms, not in worship, but in participation. The world, for a moment, aligns. The movement of the cosmos mirrors the movement of the human heart. This was the first architecture of belief, the occult made tangible, sculpted from light and shadow. Even the placement of stones may have carried sound. Studies of Stonehenge's acoustics suggest that it could amplify certain frequencies, creating a low, resonant hum when drums were struck. In that echoing space, ritual became something more than sight, it became vibration, presence. Those who stood within the circle might have felt not only part of the ceremony but inside the body of the earth itself. A curious find at several megalithic sites reveals cup marks, small, hand-carved depressions scattered across the rock surfaces. Their purpose is unknown. Some believe they were used for offerings of blood or oil, others that they represented stars, or gateways into spirit realms. Scholars still debate whether these marks were art, astronomy, or magic, or perhaps all three at once. These stones are our earliest libraries, their language older than writing. They do not speak in words but in alignment, weight, and endurance. They have outlasted empires, religions, even memories of their makers. They are what remains when language fails. When we stand before them now, tourists or pilgrims, we may not understand the rituals they held, but we still feel them. The weight of silence, the geometry of awe. Something in us responds instinctively, an ancient recognition. The stones that remember do not tell us what they know. They do not whisper their secrets. They simply wait, in perfect stillness, for the next alignment, when shadow will again fall exactly where it once did, and for an instant, the world will remember itself. The serpent's word. The first civilizations did not invent the occult, they refined it. When humans settled the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something remarkable began, memory turned into language, and language into law. Yet beneath the laws of men, older ones still whispered. In ancient Sumer, the cradle of civilization, people believed that words themselves possessed a living force. To speak a name was to create a thing. To write it was to bind it. Clay tablets unearthed from the ruins of Uruk and Nippur tell more than stories of trade or kingship. Among the ledgers of grain and taxes, we find hymns, invocations, and symbols that seem to reach beyond mere record-keeping. These were incantations, tiny spells etched in cuneiform. The priests of Sumer, half scholars and half magicians, spoke to the stars, and they called their knowledge me. It meant divine decree, but also something more abstract, the hidden order of the world. Whoever possessed me held the blueprint of creation. And at the heart of this hidden knowledge slithered a symbol older than writing, the serpent. To the Sumerians, the serpent was not merely evil. It was wisdom, rebirth, the endless cycle of life consuming itself. In the story of Ninjish Zaida, Lord of the Good Tree, a serpent god guards the threshold between worlds, the first whisper of a theme that will echo from Eden to the occult traditions of the Renaissance. One of the oldest artifacts from this period, a small cylinder seal now in the British Museum, shows two human figures seated on either side of a tree. Between them, a serpent rises. Scholars still debate whether this image inspired the later biblical tale of the Garden of Eden or if it reflects a deeper archetype that both myths drew from, collective memory of forbidden wisdom guarded by serpents. In Sumer, the priests were astronomers. Their temples doubled as observatories. They read the heavens with mathematical precision, mapping planetary paths and eclipses, but always with a touch of the mystical. They believed the gods communicated through stars, that each planet carried divine will. Their temples' stair-step towers, ziggurats, were designed as mountains reaching toward the heavens, and perhaps, as channels for celestial energy. At night, the priests ascended these towers with offerings, chanting under the same constellations we see today. They watched as Venus, Inanna's star, rose before dawn, a symbol of beauty and war. They charted Mars' erratic path, believing it to be the pulse of divine anger. What we now call astronomy was, for them, the oldest form of divination. But for all their precision, they never separated science from spirit. To measure the stars was to speak with gods. To carve a tablet was to store a fragment of divine breath. The act of writing itself was magic, clay transformed into permanence, symbols pressed into time. There are fringe theories, too, whispered in dim corners of history. Some suggest the Sumerians were taught by Anunnaki, beings from the stars, misremembered gods, or lost ancestors. The idea persists not because it's proven, but because it mirrors something true about us, that knowledge always feels like a gift stolen from the divine. And indeed, in every civilization that followed, Babylonian, Assyrian, Egyptian, the serpent slithered quietly beneath the surface, its shape coiling through stories of forbidden wisdom, of gods punished for teaching humans too much. It is both the whisper and the warning. Even now, linguists marvel at how quickly cuneiform spread, evolving from symbols of trade into prayers, contracts, and curses. To the ancients, a word was not a tool, it was a weapon. Spoken rightly, it could heal or harm. That belief, born in Sumer's clay and starlight, survives in every ritual that still calls itself occult. And so, the serpent's word endured, twisting through languages and epochs, from the first temple chant to the secret names hidden in later grimoires. It reminds us of a truth the Sumerians already knew, that all magic begins not with power, but with a word. The breath of the dead. When the earliest cities began to rise from mud and brick, death rose with them. Civilization, with its laws and markets, also brought loneliness, and with loneliness, the desire to call the lost back. Across the ancient Near East, from Ugarit to Babylon, the living began to whisper to the dead, asking not only for memory, but for guidance. Death had become a frontier, and the occult, its first cartographer. In clay tablets discovered among the ruins of Ugarit, dating to around 1200 BCE, we find rituals known as kispam, ceremonies to feed and honor the spirits of ancestors. Small offerings of beer, bread, and oil were left in vessels and buried beneath homes, a quiet communion between the living and those who had gone below. It was believed that if the dead were neglected, they grew restless. Their whispers turned to curses, their shadows to sickness. But if appeased, they could protect the house, whispering luck into the dreams of their descendants. The Babylonians, more ambitious in both magic and architecture, took this further. Their texts describe summoners of the dead, priests who entered tombs or stood beside canals, reciting words that blurred the line between lament and command. They burned herbs, scattered flour, and poured honeyed wine. The air thickened, the flames trembled, and they waited for signs, the rustle of wind, the flicker of a lamp. They called these entities Atemu, the shades. What's striking is how matter-of-fact the descriptions are. Necromancy wasn't viewed as heresy, it was part of the priest's craft, a necessary communication with the other half of existence. Death, after all, wasn't an ending, it was simply a relocation of spirit. The dead, if properly addressed, could still speak. Among the texts of Assyrian exorcists, preserved on tablets now resting in the British Museum, we find one chilling line: "He who knows the speech of the dead, the gods will listen to him." Scholars still debate whether this referred to literal resurrection or symbolic divination, but its essence remains unmistakable. To know the dead was to gain access to the divine. Archaeologists have uncovered curious artifacts from these burial rituals, small clay figurines with open mouths, as though frozen mid-breath. Were they meant to channel a soul? To capture the last exhalation of a dying god? One fragment from Kish even bears a faint inscription reading Z, meaning breath, or spirit. It's easy to imagine the ancient magician believing that a single breath, caught and sealed in clay, could be coaxed back into speech. The practice spread. In Egypt, priests recited the opening of the mouth ceremony to restore speech and vitality to mummies. In Greece, centuries later, necromancers descended into caves, carrying bronze tablets engraved with questions for the dead. The idea that language could cross the veil persisted through every culture, every empire. Yet even then, people feared the price. There are accounts of ritualists going mad after calling too long into the void, claiming they heard voices that would not stop. The boundary between invocation and infection was perilously thin. One Babylonian tablet warns, "Let not the shade linger, lest it take your name for its own." That idea, that the dead could steal identity, that speaking their names gave them power, threads through later occult traditions. To name is to summon is to risk being answered. Today, we dismiss necromancy as superstition. But we still visit graves, speak to photographs, whisper apologies to empty rooms. We still feel the pull of presence where none should be. Perhaps we never stopped speaking to the dead, only changed the language. The ancients believed the spirit's breath lingered for 3 days after death, hovering above the body, listening. That image, invisible, patient, waiting to be called, is the oldest metaphor of the occult itself. We breathe, we speak, and in doing so, we blur the line between the living and the lost. The breath of the dead, they said, never fully leaves the world. It only changes listeners. The Nile's invisible kingdom. By the time the Sumerian stars dimmed and the Babylonian towers crumbled, another civilization had already mastered the conversation between life and death. Egypt, ancient and eternal, stood as the world's most elaborate mirror of the afterlife, a kingdom that existed twice, once in sunlight, and once beneath it. The Egyptians did not see death as an ending, but as a continuation, a second voyage on the same river. Life was only one current, death, another. And somewhere between those flowing tides, the priests of the Nile discovered the magic of names. To the Egyptians, a name, the Ren, was the soul's anchor. Every person possessed many parts, body, Khat, spirit, Ka, personality, Ba, and the Ren, the true name, which carried one's essence into eternity. To know the Ren was to have power over the being it belonged to, living or dead, god or mortal. This belief, both profound and dangerous, formed the very heart of Egyptian magic. The hieroglyphic system itself, first appearing around 3200 BCE, was not merely written language. Each symbol carried vibrational life, a kind of energy that bridged the material and the divine. Scribes were more than record keepers, they were initiates, performing acts of invocation with every brushstroke. Words didn't just describe the world, they sustained it. Temples across Egypt were inscribed with what priests called Heka, the word for magic, but also for the creative force that ordered the cosmos. In their theology, the god Heka wasn't a trickster or a sorcerer, he was the embodiment of divine energy itself, present in every act of creation. When the sun rose, it did so through Heka's will, when crops grew, it was Heka's whisper in the soil. The magician, therefore, wasn't rebelling against the divine. He was imitating it. And yet, power invites secrecy. The highest priests guarded spells and names that were never spoken aloud. They wrote them on papyrus, sealed them in tombs, or carved them into the walls of temples where only the initiated could see. The Book of the Dead, more accurately the Book of Coming Forth by Day, wasn't a single text but a compilation of hundreds of magical utterances, a manual for navigating the afterlife. Each phrase was precise, each symbol deliberate, each name a key. One spell warns, "Do not speak the secret name of Ra, lest the serpent of shadow awaken." Another, inscribed inside the tomb of Seti I, describes the journey through 12 gates of night, each guarded by beings who could only be appeased by reciting their hidden names. Scholars still debate whether these gates represented literal constellations or psychological stages of transformation, a celestial map for both body and soul. Among Egypt's strangest relics is the Metternich stela, a black stone covered in spells meant to protect against snakebite. It depicts the child god Horus standing upon crocodiles, clutching serpents in each hand, the conqueror of chaos. Yet hidden within its hieroglyphs lies something subtler, an invocation calling upon Isis who knows every secret name. It implies that even the gods relied on occult knowledge to maintain power. The serpent returns again, wisdom and danger entwined. In one myth, Isis herself deceives the great sun god Ra, tricking him into revealing his secret name. With it, she gains the power to heal and to command. The message is timeless, even divinity bows before the mastery of the spoken word. For the Egyptians, this was not metaphor. Names were living things. To erase a name was to destroy a soul, an act more final than death. When pharaohs fell from favor, their cartouches were chiseled from stone, their monuments defaced, their memory devoured. Damnatio memoriae, the curse of unnaming, became their deepest terror. We might call this superstition. But even today, in our digital age, we feel echoes of it. We protect passwords, pseudonyms, and identities as if they carry pieces of our essence, because they do. The Egyptian priest would have understood perfectly. For them, the universe itself was a temple of names, stars spelling divine speech across the sky, rivers flowing with hidden syllables, tombs echoing with eternal recitations. To speak rightly was to live forever. And in the hush of the tombs, where incense curled and gold gleamed faintly in the dark, one truth endured: all power, mortal or divine, begins with the knowledge of a name. Scrolls beneath sand. For centuries, the desert has been both a tomb and a library. Beneath the sands of Egypt, fragments of forgotten scripture still sleep, papyrus curls of ink and dust that once carried the most dangerous kind of knowledge, the kind meant only for the initiated. The ancient priests may have died, but their words waited, buried in silence. Somewhere beyond the Nile, near the cliffs of Deir el-Medina, workers once whispered of scrolls sealed in jars, placed there not by accident but by intent. These were the Books of Thoth, texts said to have been written by the ibis-headed god of wisdom himself. Legends claim that anyone who read them would master speech, command nature, and see the gods as they truly are. Others said the books drove their readers mad, or worse, awakened something that could not be forgotten. Mainstream historians know that no divine manuscripts have been found, only fragments, funerary papyri, hymns, and spells. Yet the myth persisted for millennia because it spoke to a deep human temptation, that secret knowledge could make one more than human. Thoth, after all, was the scribe of the gods, the keeper of the cosmic ledger. To read his words was to trespass in the divine mind. In 1828, during an excavation near Thebes, scholars discovered a sealed chamber filled with coffins whose insides were covered in script so small and intricate it seemed almost microscopic. The hieroglyphs detailed spells of transformation and resurrection, some never before seen. Among them was a recurring symbol, a bird carrying a scroll beneath a crescent moon. Was this the signature of Thoth, or merely a poetic emblem of knowledge in flight? Scholars still debate the intent of these markings, unsure whether they were funerary decoration or coded instruction. The fascination with hidden texts continued into the Greek and Roman periods, when Egyptian priests blended native magic with foreign philosophy. Alexandria, that shimmering lighthouse of learning, became the new seat of the occult. In its great library, scholars translated the wisdom of Egypt into Greek, birthing a genre of sacred writing known as the Hermetica, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the Greek echo of Thoth. These works, like the Emerald Tablet and Poimandres, spoke in riddles of creation, transformation, and the unity of all things. As above, so below, they declared, a phrase that would haunt mystics for centuries. It was both a cosmic axiom and a promise, that by understanding the patterns of heaven, one might master the mysteries of earth. The Hermetica became the cornerstone of Western occultism, shaping everything from alchemy to Renaissance magic. Yet their origins remain veiled. Were they philosophical allegories written by Alexandrian scholars, or fragments of genuine temple initiation rituals smuggled into the world of men? Scholars still debate, their arguments echoing like chants across time. Fragments of papyrus discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945 gave the story a strange symmetry. Hidden in jars for over 1,600 years, these scrolls, now called the Gnostic Gospels, carried the same breath of secrecy as the legendary Books of Thoth. They spoke of hidden worlds, divine sparks within human souls, and gods that desired ignorance to keep humanity blind. Once again, we find the same message: knowledge as liberation, secrecy as survival. What's remarkable is not just the content of these texts, but their concealment. Someone, somewhere, believed the knowledge they carried was too precious to destroy and too dangerous to share. So they hid it, trusting time, not disciples, to guard the words. Perhaps that is the true occult tradition, not merely the magic written in books, but the act of hiding itself. The silence, the burial, the waiting. Knowledge sleeps until the world is ready to hear it again. Even today, explorers and scholars scour Egypt's sands with satellites and ground-penetrating radar, searching for undiscovered caches. Rumors persist of sealed chambers beneath the Sphinx or the Great Pyramid, hidden halls said to contain the original scrolls of Thoth. Whether they exist or not, we may never know. But the legend endures, because it speaks to something older than history, our hunger for revelation, and our terror of what revelation brings. Beneath the sand, the scrolls may still whisper, faintly, their words carried by the wind. And perhaps the desert listens, the one true keeper of every secret we've ever tried to bury. Echoes of Delphi. Far from the sands of Egypt, high upon a jagged slope of Mount Parnassus, another kind of magic was practiced, one not carved in stone or sealed beneath the earth, but breathed in through vapors. Delphi, the omphalos, the navel of the world. Here, the Greeks believed, the voice of a god could still be heard, if one knew how to listen. The oracle of Delphi was not merely a priestess. She was a conduit, a living instrument through which Apollo himself was said to speak. Her name was Pythia, and when she entered trance, her words shaped the fate of kings and cities alike. For nearly 1,000 years, her voice echoed through the marble halls of the temple, equal parts revelation and riddle. In the heart of the temple stood the Adyton, a small sunken chamber accessible only to the priestess. There, over a fissure in the earth, she sat upon a tripod, breathing the sweet, intoxicating fumes that rose from below. Ancient writers described her shaking, her eyes glazing, her mouth spilling phrases both cryptic and divine. The priest standing nearby would interpret her words, translating delirium into decree. For centuries, scholars dismissed the fumes as symbolic, a poetic metaphor for divine inspiration. But in the early 2000s, geologists discovered that the temple was indeed built directly above two fault lines. From those cracks, ethylene gas, a mild narcotic, could have seeped into the chamber, inducing euphoria, trance, and even hallucination. Science, it seemed, had explained the mystery. Yet in doing so, it only deepened it. For why would the ancients build a temple precisely there, upon that trembling intersection of stone and spirit? Scholars still debate whether the site selection was coincidence or intuition, a sacred geography understood without modern instruments. Delphi's magic was not only chemical. It was theatrical, an orchestrated encounter between the human and the divine. Pilgrims came from across the known world, offering sacrifices and gold, waiting weeks for a single sentence. "Know thyself," said the inscription upon the temple's entrance. Simple, yet impossibly vast. It implied that the divine voice was not foreign, but hidden within. The Pythia's words shaped history. It was her prophecy that guided Croesus of Lydia into battle, misled by ambiguous phrasing that doomed his empire. Her warning steered city-states toward alliances and wars. But behind the political machinery was a quieter truth. Delphi functioned as the axis between reason and revelation, logic and trance, the very balance at the heart of occult philosophy. One curious fragment of Delphic ritual survives in a 4th century BCE hymn. When the god descends, his breath becomes our speech. The line recalls Egyptian ideas of Heka, divine utterance as creation itself. Across continents and centuries, the pattern repeats, speech as bridge, the human mouth as instrument of cosmic voice. There are even reports, though unverified, of lesser oracles within Delphi, private ceremonies where initiates inhaled the vapors and experienced visions of luminous beings, figures woven from light. Were these hallucinations or glimpses of a shared psychic experience? Scholars still debate, but the accounts resonate eerily with modern studies of altered consciousness, where chemical and ritual align to open doors of perception. As Greek thought evolved, the philosophers began to rationalize what the mystics enacted. Plato spoke of divine madness, Aristotle of the active intellect, and the Stoics of the cosmic logos, a rational divine fire within all things. Delphi's rapture became philosophy's seed. The mystic's breath became the philosopher's question. Yet the oracle's power waned. By the time of the Roman emperors, her voice grew faint. The fumes diminished, the rites became more symbolic. When Christianity spread, Delphi fell silent, its temple abandoned to the mountain wind. But the echo remains. Even now, standing among the ruins, one can still feel it, a strange pressure in the air, as though the earth remembers being a mouthpiece for the divine. The ravine hums faintly with unseen life. The stones seem to listen. And perhaps they still do. For the secret of Delphi was never the gas, nor the god. It was the act of surrender, of becoming vessel, not master. A ritual as old as breath, as intimate as the whisper that still slips between our thoughts when the world grows quiet. The shadow within Rome. As the Greek gods faded into metaphor and the wisdom of Delphi grew quiet, another empire rose, vast, relentless, and rational. Rome conquered the world with legions and law. Yet beneath its marble and order, something older moved in secret, a hunger for the sacred that power could not extinguish. The empire was built on reason, but its heart still beat in rhythm with mystery. The Romans did not abolish the occult, they institutionalized it. They called it religio, a word that meant not faith, but careful observance, the binding of humanity to the will of the gods through correct ritual. Public augurs stood in the open air, reading omens from the flight of birds. Every battle, every law, every coronation began with divination. The augur raised his staff, watched the sky, and interpreted the god's silent handwriting across the clouds. It was bureaucracy and magic intertwined, an empire governed by superstition. But the truest mysteries hid underground. Beneath the streets of Rome, in candlelit chambers carved from stone, men gathered in secret to worship a god the Senate never named, Mithras, the unconquered sun. His image, a young man slaying a bull, adorned altars across the empire, from Britain to Syria. Around that image, initiates whispered vows of silence, drank from shared cups, and underwent 7 levels of initiation. The cult of Mithras is one of history's strangest enigmas. No sacred texts survive. No outsider ever witnessed their full rites. What we know comes only from fragments, mosaics, reliefs, and the few cryptic inscriptions scholars have unearthed. The Mithraea, as their temples were called, were built to resemble caves, echoing the cosmic cavern from which, they said, all creation began. Candles flickered along walls painted with stars. Water dripped from stone. The air was thick with incense and secrecy. One inscription, found in Ostia, reads simply, "And so, by this sign, he conquers the darkness." Scholars still debate whether this referred to the slaying of the bull, a symbol of chaos sacrificed to renew life, or to the initiate's own inner struggle. Some even suggest that Mithraic rituals anticipated Christian symbolism, baptism, shared meals, rebirth through sacrifice. In fact, early church fathers accused the cult of imitation, though Mithraic worship predates Christianity by centuries. There were other underground movements too, the cult of Isis, echoing Egypt's hidden wisdom, the Bakshik mysteries, where followers sought ecstasy through dance and wine, and the Eleusinian rites, imported from Greece, promising initiates a glimpse of the afterlife. Rome, though outwardly skeptical, was addicted to revelation. The Senate outlawed these rites more than once, but they always returned, spreading like fire through the cracks of empire. Even the emperors could not resist. Hadrian, the philosopher king, built temples to Serapis and held secret initiations in Egypt. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic, kept personal omens. And Nero, ever the performer, surrounded himself with astrologers who claimed to read the future in the stars, though none dared predict his end. One curious find from Pompeii, a city frozen in ash, reveals just how deeply these hidden beliefs had seeped into daily life. On a wall near a small shrine, archaeologists found a painted figure of a serpent coiled around an altar, beneath which is written, Genius Loci, the spirit of the place. It suggests that every home, every street corner, was thought to possess a consciousness of its own. The line between state ritual and private magic blurred. Soldiers wore amulets, senators consulted astrologers. Rome's order was only the surface. Beneath it, the old chaos hummed quietly, reminding them that empire was never enough to silence the mysteries of the human heart. By the 4th century, as Christianity rose and the old gods fell, these underground cults vanished from sight, absorbed, condemned, or forgotten. But their symbols endured, the serpent, the cave, the sacrifice. And through them, the whisper of a truth older than Rome itself, that beneath every empire lies a shadow, and in that shadow, belief still burns. The library that burned twice. If Rome's power was forged in blood and iron, Alexandria's was made of ink. On the edge of the Mediterranean, where Greek philosophy met Egyptian mysticism, a city was built to contain the world's knowledge, and, perhaps, its soul. The Great Library of Alexandria was not just a collection of scrolls. It was an ark for human thought, a vault of secrets both sacred and scientific. Founded by Ptolemy I in the 3rd century BCE, the library stood within the Mouseion, the Temple of the Muses. Scholars from every known land gathered there, mathematicians, poets, astronomers, physicians, magicians. They came to translate, compare, and experiment. For a time, Alexandria was the beating heart of the ancient world's mind. Within its marble halls, science and sorcery were not enemies but siblings, two hands reaching for the same mystery. Among the scrolls said to have been stored there were works on alchemy, astrology, sacred geometry, and theurgy, the art of invoking divine presence through ritual. The Book of Thoth, or its later Greek equivalent, was rumored to rest among them, copied and recited by priests who saw no difference between formula and spell. To calculate the stars was to speak with gods. To name a number was to draw a sigil in the air. Then came the fires. The first, sparked accidentally during Julius Caesar's campaign in 48 BCE, burned part of the docks and warehouses where scrolls were stored. Later fires, under Aurelian, and eventually during the Christian purges of the 4th century CE, consumed what remained. The library's destruction became legend, a symbol of humanity's lost innocence. Yet there are those who claim that not all was lost. Fragments of Hermetic and Gnostic texts appearing centuries later suggest that some knowledge survived, carried east to Byzantium or hidden in desert monasteries. The Corpus Hermeticum, rediscovered in Florence in the 15th century, bears uncanny echoes of Egyptian cosmology and Greek metaphysics, as though the library's ashes still whispered through the centuries. Scholars still debate whether these writings were composed before the fire or rescued from it, their origins obscured like smoke. The story of the library's fall has been told so often that it borders on myth, but perhaps that is its real power. A single building may burn, but the idea of a place where all knowledge is gathered, divine and forbidden alike, cannot. The occult itself is built upon that longing, the belief that somewhere, in some hidden chamber, the truth remains unburned. It's easy to romanticize the library, to imagine marble corridors lined with lamps, scrolls stacked like organs of a living intellect. But the truth was stranger. Its scholars worked in tension, experimenters and priests, skeptics and believers. One studied anatomy, another translated Egyptian rituals. Some dissected corpses while others searched for the soul's weight. Among them was a man named Zosimos of Panopolis, an alchemist who lived in Alexandria in the 3rd century CE. His surviving writings describe visions of metallic beings, divine furnaces, and transformations both physical and spiritual. He wrote of spirits trapped in matter, yearning to be purified by fire. To him, alchemy was not about gold, it was about resurrection. His laboratory was a miniature cosmos, the philosopher's crucible where body, soul, and cosmos fused. Zosimos' words would later inspire medieval alchemists and Renaissance magi, who saw in them the missing bridge between science and mysticism. But at the time, he was only one voice among many, a whisper in the great conversation of Alexandria. A conversation cut short by flame. And yet, some claim the library burned twice, not just in history, but in principle, first by fire, and later by dogma. When the world grew fearful of its own questions, when mystery was replaced by doctrine, that was the second burning. The one from which humanity still recovers. Today, the modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina stands near the old harbor, a circle of glass and granite facing the sea. On its outer walls, scripts from every known language are carved into stone. A new ark for a new age. And though it holds no spells or secret scrolls, it carries the same fragile hope, that knowledge, once gathered, might never again be lost. But if you listen closely, when the waves strike the shore and the wind hums through its atrium, you might almost hear it, the faint rustle of parchment, the ghostly crackle of flame, and beneath it all, a voice still whispering from the ashes, remember. The Alchemist's Prayer. Out of the ashes of Alexandria, knowledge scattered like dust across the deserts and mountains, carried eastward by merchants, monks, and dreamers. In the dimly lit workshops of the Middle East, a new kind of magic began to take shape, a magic that would wear the mask of science. It was called alchemy, though its heart was far older than the word itself. Alchemy was born from a question as ancient as breath: how does one turn what is base into what is divine? On the surface, it was about transmutation, transforming lead into gold, mortality into immortality. But beneath its metals and furnaces lay a deeper prayer, one that had more to do with the soul than with silver. In the 8th and 9th centuries, under the Abbasid Caliphate, alchemy found its sanctuary in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. There, Persian scholars, Greek philosophers, and Arab mystics worked side by side, translating ancient texts into Arabic, preserving fragments of Egyptian and Hermetic lore thought long lost. Among them was Jabir ibn Hayyan, known to the Latin world as Geber, the so-called father of chemistry. Jabir wrote of furnaces and balances, but also of angels and spirits that governed each metal's transformation. For him, every element had a soul, and the alchemist's task was to coax it toward perfection. Mercury was not just a metal, it was the quickened breath of the cosmos. Sulfur was fire incarnate. When united, they created not merely gold, but harmony. His recipes, part science, part liturgy, read as though whispered to him in a dream: burn until the smoke becomes spirit, and spirit becomes star. Scholars still debate whether Jabir's countless treatises were written by a single man or by generations of disciples under his name. What's certain is that they changed the course of history. From Baghdad, his works traveled west to Spain, then north into Europe, where Latin translators reawakened the sleeping Hermetic tradition. The fire of alchemy had crossed continents, hidden beneath the scholar's lamp. One of Jabir's successors, al-Razi, known later as Rhazes, took alchemy further into medicine. He distilled alcohol, refined acids, and sought the philosopher's elixir not just for gold, but for healing. In his eyes, illness was imbalance, and the cure, purification. His experiments, both physical and metaphysical, blurred the line between laboratory and chapel. To heal the body was to cleanse the soul. Yet even as these scholars experimented with substances, they spoke in riddles, guarding their work with layers of allegory. A recipe might read, "Marry the sun to the moon beneath the sign of the eagle, and the child shall never die." To the uninitiated, nonsense; to the adept, instruction. Their secrecy was not arrogance, it was protection. Knowledge of transformation, they feared, could corrupt as easily as it could enlighten. The alchemists' furnaces burned through the night, their chambers thick with fumes and devotion. Each experiment was a meditation, each failure a parable. They called the process solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. Break apart, purify, unite. What they sought in metal, they mirrored in themselves. To create the philosopher's stone was to become it, to transmute the imperfect self into the immortal one. Among the most poetic of them was Zosimos of Panopolis, the Alexandrian mystic whose writings survived in fragments. He dreamt of entering a furnace and watching his body melt, his soul purified through fire. The work, he wrote, is a divine suffering. To the alchemist, death was not the end, but the final distillation, the last stage in a lifelong purification. It is easy now to dismiss their vision as folly, but their vocabulary became the root of chemistry, pharmacology, and experimental method. They gave us distillation, acids, the alembic. And yet, for all their logic, their hearts still knelt before mystery. They believed that every substance, every spark of matter, contained divine intelligence, sleeping, waiting to awaken. In hidden rooms, behind locked doors, they prayed in the language of metal and flame. To transform was to worship. To understand was to become divine. The alchemist's prayer was not for wealth or glory, it was for unity. And if you listen carefully, through the centuries of dust and translation, their voices still murmur beneath our modern science. Not as superstition, but as yearning, the hope that somewhere, deep within the world structure, the divine still shimmers, waiting to be revealed by those who dare to seek it. The Devil's Footnotes. The Middle Ages were supposed to be an age of faith, but beneath the chanting of monks and the tolling of cathedral bells, another rhythm pulsed, slower, darker, and whispered. Europe, wrapped in the authority of the Church, was also wrapped in fear. Between the lines of prayer, another kind of scripture grew, the grimoire. A grimoire was no ordinary book. It was not meant to be read, but performed. Within its pages, ink was a form of invocation, and parchment a stage for invisible actors. These were the black books of Europe, handwritten manuals of angels and demons, recipes for potions, lists of planetary correspondences, instructions for summoning and binding unseen powers. The word itself likely derived from grammaire, a term for any text in an unfamiliar tongue. To the uninitiated, all secret knowledge was grammar, the hidden structure behind words, the rules of creation itself. In dusty libraries and beneath monastery floors, fragments of these texts still survive. The Key of Solomon, the sworn Book of Honorius, the Book of Abramelin, each a labyrinth of symbols, invocations, and diagrams. The oldest were written not by heretics, but by scholars, clerics, doctors, and monks who straddled the line between theology and the forbidden. Their Latin was impeccable, their illustrations meticulous. Yet their purpose was blasphemous by definition, to compel divine or infernal powers through human command. One 14th-century manuscript known as Liber Juratus claims to teach its reader how to summon the archangel Michael and force him to reveal the secrets of the universe. Another, the Clavicula Salomonis, describes circles of protection, blood offerings, and invocations of planetary spirits, all, it insists, drawn from the wisdom of King Solomon himself. Scholars still debate whether these texts were serious instructions or allegorical meditations on power and purity. But their authors wrote with terrifying conviction. The Church, of course, could not tolerate such works, and yet, it could never truly destroy them. Paradoxically, many grimoires were copied in monastic scriptoria, hidden among theological treatises or medical recipes. The line between sacred and profane was razor-thin. A prayer to Saint Michael could sit beside an invocation to summon Mercury. To medieval eyes, magic was not against God but a desperate attempt to understand his mechanisms. One curious detail runs through many of these books, the obsession with names. Each spell begins by listing dozens of divine or infernal appellations, as though language itself could carve open the fabric of reality. It echoes the Egyptian Ren, the power of the spoken name. Say it correctly, and you command it. Mispronounce it, and you risk inviting something you cannot banish. Hidden in the margins, written in tiny cramped script, are what modern scholars call the devil's footnotes, cryptic additions made by later readers. This sign works only beneath a waxing moon. The ink must be mixed with tears. Never read this aloud. These marginalia blur the line between commentary and spellcraft. Who wrote them? A monk tempted by curiosity? A heretic refining his art? We will never know. In some grimoires, sigils, complex geometric symbols meant to represent spirits, seem almost mathematical, eerily anticipatory of modern logic diagrams. To their makers, these were contracts, visual equations binding heaven, hell, and the human will. One could argue that each grimoire was a form of programming, instructions written not for machines, but for reality itself. But the price was high. The church branded such books as gateways to damnation. Possession could mean trial, torture, or death. Yet the manuscripts survived, copied by trembling hands, traded in whispers, hidden in walls. Their survival suggests not rebellion, but longing. Even as priests preached salvation, people still yearned for control, for some small grasp of the divine mechanics beneath their suffering. In the 15th century, as printing spread, so did the black books. The occult was democratized. Now anyone could own the words once reserved for the initiated. Fear grew accordingly. Inquisitors began to equate literacy itself with heresy. The written word, once the symbol of civilization, became suspect. And so, between the lines of scripture and science, another kind of knowledge crept, silent, relentless, and alive. A footnote at the edge of faith. A reminder that even in an age ruled by God, humanity still reached for the forbidden grammar of creation. Today, the grimoires sit behind glass in museums, their ink faded, their magic inert. But if you stand close enough, you might still feel it, the faint hum beneath the vellum, the heartbeat of the page. As if the words are waiting, still, for someone brave, or foolish, enough to read them aloud again. The Woman in the Woods. When the church began to tighten its grip on Europe, the shadows deepened, not only in cathedrals and courts, but in forests, fields, and forgotten villages. It was there, on the edges of civilization, that another kind of power persisted, one not written in grimoires or spoken in Latin, but sung in old tongues to the rhythm of the earth. The church called it witchcraft. The people called it healing. In truth, the witch was not born in darkness. She was the keeper of memory, the midwife, the herbalist, the bone setter, the storyteller. She knew when to sow and when to harvest, how to brew a potion for fever, how to ease childbirth or curse blight from crops. Her knowledge came not from books, but from generations of observation and intuition. To the villagers, she was essential. To the authorities, she was dangerous. By the 14th century, Europe was restless. Famine, plague, and war had hollowed faith. People sought someone to blame, and suspicion turned toward the women who seemed untouched by divine order, those who worked at night, who healed the sick, who spoke to animals, who simply lived alone. The Church's theology of evil transformed folk belief into heresy. Manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487, gave clerics and inquisitors a weaponized mythology. It described witches as servants of the devil, flying through the night to feast with demons, signing pacts in blood. Yet behind this lurid imagery, the authors revealed their deeper fear, that women, through knowledge and autonomy, could wield power outside the Church's reach. Historians estimate that between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe between the 15th and 18th centuries. Most were women. Some confessed under torture, others under despair. Their supposed crimes ranged from causing storms to stealing milk from cows. Yet, reading between the lines of these confessions, one finds a different truth: whispered hymns to forgotten gods, fragments of ancient fertility rites, traces of pagan memory surviving in secret. In some regions, especially in rural France and Germany, witches, described being taught by spirits or ancestral women called the Good Ones. Their meetings, Sabbaths, as inquisitors later named them, may have been nothing more than seasonal gatherings, community rituals rooted in pre-Christian belief. But once filtered through the lens of fear, they became proof of diabolical conspiracy. Scholars still debate whether these rites represented an organized underground religion or scattered remnants of folk spirituality. What's clear is that the persecution of witches erased centuries of women's wisdom. Herbal medicine, midwifery, and folk magic, all labeled sorcery, were driven into silence. Knowledge that had once cured and protected was now treated as contagion. Yet even within that terror, the archetype of the witch transformed. She became not merely a victim, but a symbol of resistance. In art and folklore, she was reimagined as a liminal figure, half feared, half revered. She lived in the woods, at the threshold between worlds, where law dissolved and intuition reigned. She embodied what the world had lost: connection to nature, to cycles, to the unseen rhythms of life. One curious case from 17th-century Scotland tells of a woman named Isabel Gowdie, whose confessions, though extracted under duress, read like poetry. She spoke of flying through the night with fairy companions, of speaking to the wind, of transforming into animals by reciting ancient rhymes. I shall go into a hare, with sorrow and sigh and mickle care. Whether delusion or inherited oral tradition, her words preserved something primal, the echo of the shaman's chant, the call to merge with nature's spirits. Modern historians note how similar these ideas are to ancient animist traditions, the belief that every living thing carries consciousness. The witch, then, was not the enemy of God, but the last remnant of humanity's dialogue with the living world. When the witch hunts finally subsided, Europe was changed. The fields fell quiet. The old songs faded. But the archetype endured, reawakening centuries later in new forms, in art, literature, feminism, and modern occult revival. She remains the shadow of civilization, the embodiment of the forbidden feminine, the wisdom that refuses erasure. She is memory personified, the one who remembers what the rest of the world chose to forget. And if you walk deep enough into the woods, where the trees breathe slow and the air hums with unseen life, you might still sense her there, not a demon, not a saint, but something older, whispering softly, I was here before your gods. The Mirror and the Queen. By the time the witch hunts began to fade, a new age of curiosity was dawning. Europe's Renaissance was a strange paradox, an era that celebrated reason and art, yet could not quite abandon its fascination with the unseen. While painters perfected perspective and philosophers rediscovered Plato, scholars in candlelit rooms whispered prayers to angels, drew circles on the floor, and stared into mirrors, hoping to glimpse eternity. At the heart of this curious marriage between science and sorcery stood one man, John Dee. Mathematician, cartographer, astronomer, advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, and, in secret, magician. Dee was a man of two worlds, Oxford scholar by day, conjurer by night. To his queen, he was a loyal servant. To himself, he was something else entirely, a seeker of divine geometry, of the hidden order that united heaven and earth. In his private study at Mortlake, Dee assembled one of the greatest libraries in England, filled not just with Euclid and Ptolemy, but with grimoires, alchemical treatises, and hermetic texts rescued from monasteries. He believed all knowledge, sacred and profane, stemmed from a single divine source, the Prisca Theologia, the original wisdom of God. To reclaim it, he sought direct communion with angels. And so, in 1582, Dee began his great experiment. With the help of a scryer, a man named Edward Kelly, he used a polished obsidian mirror and crystal ball to contact celestial beings. Kelly would gaze into the glass, enter trance, and recite what he saw: winged figures, fiery wheels, and words in an unknown language. Dee carefully transcribed everything. That language, they claimed, was Enochian, the speech of angels, the tongue used by God to create the universe. To Dee, this was no illusion. He believed he was rebuilding the communication lost at Babel, restoring humanity's direct link to the divine. His notebooks describe precise sigils, angelic hierarchies, and ethers, or layers of heaven, mapped with mathematical precision. Scholars still debate whether Enochian was an elaborate code, a linguistic experiment, or something stranger, a transmission from Dee's own subconscious centuries before psychology existed. The angels offered not only language but prophecy. They told Dee of coming wars, of empires that would rise and fall, of England's divine mission to bring enlightenment to the world, a vision that would later echo in the rhetoric of empire. They also demanded sacrifice, fasting, chastity, and obedience. Dee, ever faithful, complied. But then the messages darkened. The angels spoke of a union of flesh between Dee and Kelly's wives, a command Dee reluctantly obeyed, believing it a divine test. Not long after, the partnership collapsed. Kelly left, and Dee's reputation unraveled. He died in poverty, his once great library ransacked. Yet his influence endured. His mirror and crystal ball still exist. The mirror now sits in the British Museum, black and flawless, reflecting nothing but your own face. Queen Elizabeth, who once called Dee my philosopher, consulted him on auspicious dates for her coronation and voyages. His glyph, a complex circle intersected by lines, was his signature, Monas Hieroglyphica, a symbol he claimed contained the secret unity of all creation. In his mind, mathematics, magic, and monarchy were reflections of the same divine pattern. It was Dee's vision of the universe as a living, symbolic system that would inspire later occult orders, the Rosicrucians, the Golden Dawn, even modern ceremonial magicians like Aleister Crowley. His fusion of reason and revelation became the Renaissance's defining paradox, a world that could map the stars but still feared what lay beyond them. The mirror became his legacy, a surface between worlds, where the known meets the unknowable. To look into it was to confront not only the divine, but oneself. Even now, that obsidian mirror draws pilgrims. Some claim it hums faintly when touched, as though remembering voices long gone. Others say that when the museum lights dim, the mirror swallows reflections entirely, showing nothing but darkness, or perhaps, what stares back from the other side. John Dee's life remains a cautionary tale wrapped in brilliance. He was the last of the mega scholars, a man who refused to divide knowledge into sacred and profane. To him, the universe was a single manuscript, and the human mind, its reader. He believed the angels spoke not to command him, but to remind him, and us, that the true mirror is not glass or crystal, but consciousness itself. The enlightened shadows. The 17th and 18th centuries called themselves the Age of Reason. The printing press multiplied knowledge, telescopes mapped the heavens, and microscopes revealed worlds unseen by the naked eye. Humanity began to trust its instruments more than its instincts. The gods were retreating, replaced by geometry, gravity, and the methodical pulse of science. And yet, behind the clean lines of Enlightenment thought, the old shadows stirred. For every philosopher who proclaimed reason triumphant, there was another who sought the divine in equations, the infinite in experiments. The occult had not died. It had simply changed its language. One of the strangest figures of this era was Isaac Newton. To most, he was the model of scientific genius, the man who discovered gravity, invented calculus, and defined the laws of motion. But hidden in his private papers, unpublished until long after his death, was a very different story. Among his formulas and diagrams were thousands of pages on alchemy, prophecy, and biblical chronology. Newton spent far more time studying the Book of Revelation than writing Principia Mathematica. He believed the universe was a coded message from God, written in the language of number and light. His experiments with prisms were not just physical demonstrations, they were acts of revelation. Light, to Newton, was divine intelligence made visible. In his alchemical notebooks, he sought the vegetable spirit, the secret life force that animated matter. He even attempted to reconstruct the legendary philosopher's stone, though he saw it not as a lump of transmuted gold, but as a key to the mind of the Creator. Scholars still debate whether Newton's mysticism was madness or genius, or both. He was not alone. Robert Boyle, another pioneer of modern chemistry, was a devout believer in angelic intervention and the moral purpose of nature. Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish scientist and engineer, claimed to converse with spirits who revealed to him the structure of heaven. Franz Mesmer discovered animal magnetism, an invisible force that flowed through all beings, an idea that would later evolve into hypnosis and psychology. Each of them stood with one foot in the laboratory and the other in the temple. The Enlightenment's great irony was that it needed its mystics. Rationalism thrived on curiosity, and curiosity has always been an occult impulse, the desire to pierce the veil. Every discovery, every law of motion, was an act of revelation. In this sense, the scientist became the magician of a new age, still invoking unseen forces, still summoning order from chaos, only now in the name of reason. Secret societies flourished in this twilight between faith and fact. The Rosicrucians claimed descent from ancient Egypt and Alexandria, offering initiation into esoteric truths that blended alchemy, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism. Their manifestos, Fama Fraternitatis and Confessio Fraternitatis, appeared mysteriously across Europe, promising a universal reformation of mankind. Whether the Brotherhood truly existed or was a literary myth remains unknown, but their symbols inspired generations of thinkers, artists, and dreamers. Then came the Freemasons, inheritors of both Hermetic and architectural secrets. They replaced altars with lodges, gods with geometry. Their rituals invoked the great architect of the universe, a divine order hidden in stone and symbol. Masonic imagery spread quietly through cathedrals, paintings, and politics, the all-seeing eye, the compass, the unfinished pyramid. What had once been temple magic was reborn as civic ritual. Even Voltaire, that champion of reason, was a Mason. So was Mozart, whose final opera The Magic Flute is an allegory of initiation, transformation, and enlightenment. It is a hymn to the ancient mysteries, disguised as entertainment. In its music, reason and revelation sing together one last time before parting ways. As the 18th century drew to a close, revolutions shook Europe and America alike. The New World Order was built on liberty, science, and skepticism, yet its foundations still glowed faintly with occult light. The Declaration of Independence spoke of nature's God. The US dollar bore the pyramid and the eye. Even as mankind claimed to have left the age of superstition behind, its symbols clung to our monuments, our art, our unconscious. Perhaps they still do. The Enlightenment never truly banished mystery, it merely changed its form. The candle gave way to the microscope, the oracle to the equation. But the question remained the same, the question that haunted Newton, Boyle, and every seeker since. If the universe can be measured, who, or what, does the measuring? And in the quiet between thoughts, when logic falters and the stars seem too perfectly placed, we might still feel it, the shimmer of the old faith, the heartbeat of the unseen, reminding us that even reason casts a shadow. The lodges of the hidden hand. By the late 18th century, Europe was a chessboard of revolution, reason, and secret ritual. Kingdoms toppled, empires rose, and in candlelit rooms behind locked doors, men whispered of light, brotherhood, and hidden wisdom. These were the lodges, the networks of thinkers and mystics who believed they were heirs to a cosmic inheritance. They called themselves Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and Illuminati, though their roots, like their rituals, ran deeper than the names carved on their doors. To outsiders, these societies appeared as harmless fraternities, gentlemen's clubs for philosophers and craftsmen. But to initiates, they were something more, repositories of ancient truth, coded in geometry, number, and allegory. The Freemasons, in particular, saw themselves as guardians of a secret architecture, not of cathedrals, but of civilization itself. Their god was the great architect of the universe, and their temples were not built from stone, but from the hearts and minds of men. Inside the lodge, the initiate passed through symbolic death and rebirth, blindfolded and led by the hand, learning that light, true illumination, could only come through inner transformation. The rituals blended echoes of Egyptian mystery schools, Hermetic philosophy, and medieval guild oaths. At their core was a single conviction, that knowledge, discipline, and moral virtue could make a man divine. And yet, with secrecy comes suspicion. As revolutions spread, in France, America, and beyond, whispers grew louder. Pamphlets accused Masons of orchestrating revolts, of manipulating kings and parliaments. In 1776, the same year the American colonies declared independence, a Bavarian professor named Adam Weishaupt founded the Order of the Illuminati. His goal was enlightenment through reason and freedom from tyranny, but his methods were covert, his oaths binding. Within a decade, his order was banned, its members scattered. Still, the legend of the Illuminati only grew. To a fearful world, they became the invisible architects of change, the hidden hand guiding revolutions, the shadow government behind thrones. Scholars today find little evidence of their survival, but their myth endures because it reflects a deeper truth: every age of enlightenment births an age of conspiracy. One curious Masonic ritual from the 18th century, described in an obscure French manuscript, instructed initiates to meditate on a mirror framed by candles until they saw the light of one's own soul reflected as the divine spark. It echoes John Dee's obsidian scrying and anticipates later occult practices of self-illumination. In these rituals, the boundary between psychology and magic blurred. Initiation was as much introspection as revelation. The symbols of these societies seeped quietly into public life. The Eye of Providence, the compass and square, the blazing star, once secret emblems, now carved into courthouses and currency. When the United States adopted the Pyramid Ani seal in 1782, its Latin motto, Annuit Coeptis, he approves of our undertakings, carried unmistakable echoes of Masonic optimism. The new republic was, in some ways, a temple of the Enlightenment. Its founders, many of them Masons, saw democracy itself as a sacred geometry of human order. Yet the more light they sought, the darker the corners became. By the 19th century, Freemasonry had splintered into esoteric orders and offshoots, each claiming to preserve the purest wisdom. The Scottish Rite, the Memphis Misraim, and the Order of the Golden Rosy Cross layered symbols upon symbols, rites upon rites. Their members included scientists, poets, generals, and even monarchs, a fraternity of those who believed knowledge should remain veiled from the unready. But secrecy, like power, always attracts paranoia. Anti-Masonic movements accused them of devil worship, corruption, and world domination. Churches condemned them, governments outlawed them. The lodges became mirrors of their age, reflecting both enlightenment and fear, idealism and conspiracy. Scholars still debate the true extent of their influence. Were they truly steering history from behind the veil, or simply mirroring its tides? The answer, perhaps, lies in their own teachings, that every symbol conceals its opposite. To build light, one must understand shadow. The lodge's greatest legacy was not their secrecy, but their symbolism. They taught generations to see the universe as a cathedral, one built not from dogma, but from mystery. Every compass stroke, every stone laid, was a gesture toward harmony, a reminder that humanity's greatest work is always unfinished. And in the flicker of candlelight, as the initiate's blindfold fell away, the lesson was revealed, simple, profound, and dangerous. The power to shape the world lies not in the stars, nor in heaven, but within the human will to know. The Empire of Esoterica. By the mid-19th century, the modern world had awakened. Factories smoked, telegraphs sang, and science seemed to unravel the last of heaven's mysteries. Yet even as the machine age dawned, something unexpected stirred in its shadow, a spiritual hunger, an ache for meaning in a world suddenly stripped of wonder. The occult, long buried beneath the rational world's marble floors, rose again, but this time, it wore a scholar's cloak and spoke in the language of progress. Victorian England became the beating heart of this new esoteric empire. Parlors that once echoed with polite conversation now hosted seances. Gentlemen who read Darwin by day attended spiritual circles by night. The age of logic was also the age of table rapping, ectoplasm, and messages from the beyond. To the industrial mind, ghosts were no longer superstition, they were phenomena waiting to be measured. At the center of this revival stood one extraordinary woman, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Born in Russia in 1831, she claimed to have traveled the world, from Egypt to Tibet, gathering wisdom from hidden masters. In 1875, she co-founded the Theosophical Society in New York with Henry Steele Olcott, a colonel and lawyer turned mystic. Their mission was ambitious, to synthesize science, religion, and philosophy into a single, unifying system. Blavatsky's magnum opus, The Secret Doctrine, 1888, wove together Hindu cosmology, Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and evolution, proposing that humanity was guided by an ancient brotherhood of adepts, the Mahatmas, who worked unseen to steer human progress. To skeptics, it was elaborate fantasy; to believers, revelation. Theosophy became a bridge between East and West, blending ancient occult ideas with the optimism of modernity. Her followers included poets, artists, and early psychologists. William Butler Yeats, later a Nobel laureate, attended theosophical meetings before joining the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the most influential magical society of the modern age. Founded in London in 1888 by 3 Rosicrucian Freemasons, the Golden Dawn sought to codify magic into a complete spiritual system: astrology, alchemy, Kabbalah, tarot, and angelic invocation all combined into one labyrinth of initiation. Its members read like a roll call of the era's creative geniuses: Yeats, Arthur Machen, Algernon Blackwood, and, later, the notorious Aleister Crowley. The order's rituals were drawn from the same currents that flowed through John Dee's Enochian magic and the Hermetica of Alexandria. Each degree mirrored the ancient mystery schools, guiding initiates through symbolic death, purification, and enlightenment. One ritual, recorded in the vault of the Adepti, described the initiate's journey through the Sephiroth of the Kabbalistic tree of life, encountering archangels, divine names, and the light of Tifereth, the solar consciousness. To outsiders, it looked like theater. To the initiated, it was a psychological and spiritual crucible. Yet, as in every age, light invited shadow. Rivalries fractured the Golden Dawn, secrets spilled into the public, and Crowley, its most flamboyant student, declared himself the prophet of a new aeon, proclaiming, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." For some, he was genius; for others, madman. But his reinterpretation of magic, as an art of self-realization rather than superstition, would echo through the 20th century. Meanwhile, Theosophy's influence spread beyond Europe. In India, its ideas helped spark a spiritual renaissance, blending Eastern philosophy with Western esotericism. In California, it inspired communes, meditation circles, and what would later be called New Age thought. The occult had gone global, not as a religion, but as a map of consciousness. Scholars still debate how much of Blavatsky's wisdom was invention and how much preservation of older teachings. Her letters to her students speak of a wisdom older than Egypt, hidden in plain sight. Whether literal or metaphorical, the sentiment captured the age's anxiety, a world racing forward yet yearning backward, desperate to rediscover what industrial progress had erased. In those candlelit lodges and drawing rooms, humanity rehearsed a truth it had always known, that knowledge without mystery is hollow, and mystery without knowledge is chaos. The empire of esoterica was not built of nations, but of minds, architects of an invisible cathedral that spanned continents, from London to Cairo to the Himalayas. And though its empires fell like all others, its influence lingers, in meditation, in psychology, in art and myth. The symbols of that century, the eye, the serpent, the rising sun, still watch us from the margins, reminders that the ancient quest for illumination never truly ended. It merely changed form, waiting for another generation to remember. The Occult War. As the 20th century dawned, the world seemed poised between enlightenment and apocalypse. Industry had remade the landscape, empires ruled half the earth, and science promised to unlock every secret, yet the air hummed with dread. Machines could now kill as swiftly as gods once could. Beneath this new power, old myths began to stir again. The occult, far from fading, found new patrons, generals, dictators, and dreamers who saw in its symbols the language of destiny itself. The Great War shattered illusions of progress. Millions dead, nations in ruin, reason had failed to save humanity from itself. And so, in the uneasy silence that followed, the search for hidden meaning returned with ferocity. Secret societies reawakened, blending mysticism with nationalism, and in that strange twilight between politics and the paranormal, Europe began to dream darkly. In Germany, esoteric brotherhoods flourished, the Thule Society, the Germain Norden, and dozens of others obsessed with ancient runes, racial mythology, and the lost continent of Atlantis. They claimed to channel the wisdom of forgotten Aryan priest-kings, merging theosophy's cosmic hierarchies with pseudoscience and nationalism. Out of these occult circles, the seeds of Nazism germinated. The swastika itself, once a symbol of the sun and divine motion, was repurposed into a banner of conquest. Adolf Hitler, though more opportunist than mystic, surrounded himself with believers. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, envisioned his order as a new knightly brotherhood, a Teutonic priesthood dedicated to ancient Germanic gods. At Wilsberg Castle, he commissioned rituals, astrological research, and archaeological expeditions searching for relics of lost civilizations. The castle's central chamber, still intact today, bears a black sun mosaic, 12 radiating sigils forming an emblem of power. Some claim the SS conducted seances, channeling ancestral spirits for guidance. Others whisper of expeditions to Tibet, Antarctica, and the Middle East, hunting for proof of Atlantis or the Holy Grail. The truth is murky, but the intent was real, to wrap modern violence in mythic justification. Scholars still debate whether Nazi occultism was true belief or political theater, but the results were the same. The esoteric became weaponized. Even the Allies weren't immune. In Britain, magician and intelligence officer Aleister Crowley, once exiled and vilified, offered his services to the war effort, suggesting psychological tactics drawn from occult principles. Across the Atlantic, Jack Parsons, co-founder of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, performed rituals invoking ancient gods alongside his rocketry experiments. Science and sorcery, once rivals, had become uneasy partners. During World War II, the occult became both propaganda and paranoia. Both sides accused the other of summoning dark forces. Nazi runes, British ciphers, psychic warfare, remote viewing, rumor bled into reality until no one could tell where myth ended and intelligence began. In the aftermath, Cold War agencies quietly investigated extrasensory perception, telepathy, and mind control. The CIA's Stargate project, launched decades later, would attempt to harness psychic vision for espionage. Behind the curtain of rational governance, the old dream persisted, power through hidden knowledge. But the occult war was not only political, it was cultural. Surrealist artists, existentialist philosophers, and avant-garde writers turned to magic as metaphor for a shattered world. In the rubble of modernity, symbolism felt more honest than reason. The real is only a shadow, wrote André Breton, who declared surrealism a form of modern alchemy, the transformation of consciousness through art. By mid-century, the occult had gone underground again, retreating from politics but thriving in art and literature. The works of Jung reframed alchemy as psychology, myth as map. His concept of the collective unconscious gave the occult a new vocabulary, archetypes instead of demons, individuation instead of initiation. The magician became the analyst, the ritual the dream. Yet the scars of that era linger. Even today, conspiracy theorists point to the symbols of the Third Reich, the Pentagon, and secret lodges, claiming invisible hands still steer the world. Perhaps it is not power they fear, but meaning, the sense that history itself might be a ritual, repeating, reenacting, echoing through time. One thing is certain, the occult did not die in the fires of war. It adapted, as it always does, shape-shifting from religion to philosophy, from politics to psychology. It remains what it has always been, the shadow cast by knowledge, following humanity wherever it dares to call itself enlightened. And if history is a ritual, perhaps the 20th century was its darkest invocation, the moment when humanity, in seeking to master hidden forces, nearly became consumed by them. The Age of Aquarius. When the guns of the Second World War fell silent, the world exhaled, but that breath carried more than relief. Beneath the rubble, something ancient stirred again, reborn in neon and vinyl. The 20th century's second half, the era of satellites and psychedelics, transistor radios and transistor souls, became the stage for the occult's quiet resurrection. The philosophers had fallen silent, the seekers took their place. And their gospel was simple: the universe is alive, and we are its reflection. The 1960s arrived like a fever dream. The old gods of empire were gone, and science had shown humanity its smallness, a blue planet suspended in darkness. But the view from space also revealed something else: connection. Boundaries blurred, ideologies faltered, and amid the static of modern life, a new spiritual frequency emerged. They called it the Age of Aquarius, borrowing from astrological lore, the moment when Earth would pass into a new cosmic alignment, heralding enlightenment, harmony, and collective awakening. In truth, it was less an age than a metaphor, a hope that humanity might finally step beyond superstition and domination into something gentler, more attuned to the rhythms of nature and self. But as always, the line between mysticism and myth blurred. The symbols of ancient magic resurfaced in unexpected places: mandalas painted on protest banners, tarot decks shuffled on university lawns, yoga mats unrolled in city apartments. The old rituals had simply changed costume. The New Age movement, as it came to be called, drew freely from theosophy, Eastern philosophy, and psychology. Carl Jung's writings on synchronicity and archetypes became sacred texts. Astrology and tarot became tools of self-understanding rather than fate. The medium changed, from parchment to paperback, from ritual circle to therapy session, but the essence remained: to seek the hidden order beneath the chaos. Musicians, artists, and thinkers became the new magi. The Beatles traveled to India to study transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Jim Morrison read Rimbaud and invoked the shaman's voice on stage. David Bowie mixed Kabbalah with sci-fi, turning the magician into a glam icon. Even the counterculture's experiments with LSD echoed ancient shamanic rites, the chemical descent into death and rebirth, chaos and vision. In California, communes sprouted like modern temples. The Esalen Institute, perched above the Pacific cliffs, became a nexus of the human potential movement, where mystics and scientists gathered to explore consciousness, energy, and the boundaries of the human mind. Workshops on Gestalt therapy and yoga shared space with lectures on alchemy and telepathy. It was, in its own way, a new Alexandria, eclectic, visionary, fragile. And yet, amid the light and incense, shadows gathered too. The Manson family, once disciples of cosmic love, twisted New Age rhetoric into nightmare. Cults and self-proclaimed prophets proliferated, each promising transcendence, some demanding obedience. The dream of collective awakening often became the nightmare of control. Still, something profound had shifted. The occult was no longer confined to dusty grimoires or secret lodges; it had entered the bloodstream of popular culture. Tarot cards were sold beside novels. Astrology columns ran in every newspaper. Meditation, once exotic, became mainstream. Even psychology embraced the language of energy, archetype, and transformation. One curious example of this synthesis came from the psychologist Abraham Maslow, who spoke of peak experiences, moments of union with the universe, spontaneous and sacred. It was secular mysticism, stripped of dogma but radiant with the same hunger for transcendence. His hierarchy of needs ended not with survival, but with self-actualization, the soul's ascent in modern terms. The 1970s crowned the movement with music and myth. Hair declared the dawning of Aquarius. Led Zeppelin wove runes and Tolkien's mysticism into rock. Stevie Nicks turned witchcraft into art. The once forbidden language of magic became poetry for an age of uncertainty. Scholars still debate whether the New Age represented genuine spiritual renewal or cultural escapism, a retreat into fantasy at a time of social upheaval. Yet its legacy is undeniable. It democratized the esoteric, turning what had once been the guarded property of temples and orders into something every soul could touch. For the first time, the ancient occult no longer hid from the world, it merged with it. Astrology met self-help, alchemy met psychology. The magician became the therapist, the seeker the patient, the ritual the act of living authentically. The age of Aquarius was not prophecy fulfilled, but memory reborn, the memory that, beneath progress and politics, humanity has always sought communion with something vast, unseen, and radiant. And though the stars may not truly govern our fates, they still remind us of what our ancestors knew when they carved circles in stone, that the cosmos and the self are mirrors, and that to understand one is to glimpse the other. Electric rituals. As the 20th century spun into its final decades, the flicker of candlelight gave way to the glow of screens. The old temples of the occult, the lodge, the circle, the dimly lit library, were replaced by humming machines, cables, and code. Humanity had built a new kind of magic, digital, immediate, invisible. The ancient dream of shaping reality through symbols had returned, this time in binary. The age of the computer was not the death of mysticism, it was its reincarnation. Every programmer knew the feeling: to write a line of code and watch it manifest as action was to command creation. Logic became incantation. Syntax replaced Latin. And for a new generation raised on data rather than dogma, the screen became the mirror, the cursor the wand. In the 1980s and 90s, a new form of occultism emerged: chaos magic. Born from the countercultural ferment of postmodern Britain, it rejected hierarchy, dogma, and ancient authority. Nothing is true, everything is permitted, its practitioners declared, quoting Hassan I Sabbah, the medieval mystic assassin. In chaos magic, belief itself was the tool. Symbols, gods, rituals, all were interchangeable, temporary constructs used to shape reality. One could summon a deity from Egyptian myth, or one invented from pop culture. The point was not worship but effect. Sigils, stylized symbols charged with intent, became the new spellwork. Drawn on napkins, tattooed on skin, uploaded into forums, they were compact equations of will and imagination. When activated through meditation, desire, or art, they became living code, instructions written into the universe's operating system. The movement's prophet was Peter J. Carroll, whose book Liber Null, 1978, distilled the chaos magician's creed, that consciousness, focused and disciplined, could bend probability. His disciple Phil Hine translated these ideas into accessible practice, merging psychology with sorcery. To them, magic was not superstition but self-programming, hacking the mind to hack reality. It was only a matter of time before the digital world embraced this philosophy. Early hackers spoke in strangely occult terms: spells became scripts, demons became background processes, root access became power over the unseen. The act of typing an invisible command to change the world echoed the magician's ancient art: the right word, at the right time, reshaping matter. Scholars still debate whether this was coincidence or cultural inheritance. Yet the parallels are undeniable. The hacker's black screen mirrored the magician's black mirror, both demanded solitude, concentration, and faith in invisible systems. The network itself, vast, formless, omnipresent, began to resemble the occult imagination's oldest dream, a world mind. By the dawn of the 21st century, magic had gone online. Digital sigils, images encoded with intention, were shared anonymously on forums, spreading like viruses of belief. Artists created hypersigils, multi-platform rituals using film, fiction, and social media to shape collective consciousness. The comic writer Grant Morrison, a self-proclaimed magician, described his series The Invisibles as a long-form spell to awaken humanity's latent divinity. The boundaries between art, technology, and sorcery dissolved. Even the language of Silicon Valley carried the scent of hermeticism. Tech visionaries spoke of transcendence, of uploading consciousness, of immortality through data, the digital philosopher's stone. Artificial intelligence was imagined as the new demiurge, capable of shaping and predicting fate. Our devices became talismans, glowing oracles whispering personalized prophecies in algorithmic tongues. But as with every new magic, power brings peril. The same tools that connected minds also captured them. The internet became a collective unconscious, brilliant, chaotic, haunted. Memes spread like mantras, misinformation behaved like curses. Every click a micro-ritual, every feed a hall of mirrors. A curious modern phenomenon illustrates the fusion of magic and machine, egregores, digital entities created by group belief. Online communities, through shared attention and imagination, generate personalities that seem to act independently, AI chatbots, tulpa phenomena, or viral mascots that take on lives of their own. It's the oldest occult principle reborn, thought made form, spirit created by focus. We no longer summon angels or demons, we build them. Our algorithms predict desires, our devices finish our sentences. We speak to invisible intelligences every day, and unlike these angels or Delphi's gods, they answer instantly. Scholars still debate whether this is transcendence or addiction, illumination or entrapment. In this electric age, ritual has become ambient. Every login is an invocation, every password a name of power. The magician's circle has widened to encompass the globe. We've wired the old occult truth into the very infrastructure of civilization. Reality responds to symbols, and symbols respond to will. The ancients lit fires to speak to their gods. We light screens. And perhaps the line between them is thinner than we think. For in the hum of servers and the shimmer of pixels, we can still hear it, the faint whisper that began beside a campfire long ago: all things are connected. All things are alive. The circle unbroken. We began in darkness, with whispers around a fire. Millennia later, we find ourselves surrounded by a different kind of flame, electric, digital, endless, but the whisper has not ceased. Humanity's conversation with the unseen continues, reshaped with every age, reframed by every generation that looks into the void and dares to imagine that it might look back. The occult has survived not because it defies reason, but because it completes it. It is the other half of the human equation, the poetry that answers mathematics, the shadow that gives shape to the light. In truth, every civilization we have explored, Sumer, Egypt, Greece, Rome, the Renaissance, the Machine Age, has told the same story with new symbols, that there is meaning hidden within matter, and that through intention, imagination, or ritual, we might touch it. The magicians called it Heka, logos, me, word, will. Scientists call it energy, consciousness, information. But the impulse is the same, to find the order behind the chaos, to glimpse the machinery beneath the stars. Even now, scholars dig through ruins, decoding the symbols of lost civilizations. Psychologists map the architecture of dreams, particle physicists seek invisible forces that bind creation, and coders summon artificial minds from nothing but syntax. All are acts of invocation, new forms of the same ancient desire, to understand what breathes beneath reality's skin. In the modern world, magic hides in plain sight. Meditation apps guide us through breathing spells once practiced by monks. The symbols of tarot decorate fashion. Corporations use sigil-like logos to channel identity and intent. Every advertisement is an enchantment of desire, every algorithm, an invocation of prediction. We still practice ritual, we simply call it routine. We still seek transcendence, we simply name it connection. The occult persists because it speaks the language of metaphor, and metaphor is the foundation of thought itself. To imagine that something unseen guides the visible is not irrational, it is creative. It is how we invent meaning, how we discover truth, how we endure uncertainty. Every myth, every religion, every scientific theory begins as a story, and all stories are, in their way, spells. Some argue that magic has lost its mystery in the age of reason and simulation. Yet perhaps the opposite is true. When we look into the depths of space and see galaxies shaped like eyes, when we peer into subatomic particles that seem to blink in and out of existence, when we encounter consciousness that no machine can replicate, we find ourselves again at the fire's edge, staring into a darkness we cannot name. The occult reminds us that the unknown is not an enemy. It is the horizon of growth. Each time humanity believes it has solved the puzzle, the mystery deepens. The circle closes, and then opens again. Archaeologists once found in a forgotten cave a spiral carved by hand, its meaning uncertain. Some said it marked time, others, the soul's journey. But perhaps it was simply a mirror, a symbol for the endless rhythm of knowing and unknowing that defines us. The spiral is the truest emblem of the occult, not a straight path to enlightenment, but a winding return to origins, where every ending is another beginning. Scholars still debate whether magic ever truly existed, whether rituals had real power, whether the ancient adepts could command nature. But in another sense, the answer is obvious. Magic exists wherever intention changes reality. A word can wound. A story can heal. A belief can reshape a life. In that quiet, persistent alchemy of mind and matter, the old truth endures: we are all magicians, whether we know it or not. From the first spark struck in darkness to the glowing constellations of our digital night, the human journey has always been an invocation, an unbroken ritual of seeking, remembering, and transforming. The tools change, the longing remains. And so, the circle stands unbroken, drawn in ash, in ink, in code, in thought, still whispering the same ancient prayer beneath every age's noise. As above, so below. As within, so without. As always, so forever. Conclusion. From prehistoric fires to silicon circuits, the occult has followed humanity like its own reflection, the echo of our need to make sense of the unseen. It is neither superstition nor science, but the bridge between them, the art of wonder. We seek patterns in the stars and in our own thoughts because something in us remembers that they are one and the same. Each era cloaks the mystery in new language, divine names, formulae, algorithms, yet the essence remains, to touch the infinite with mortal hands. Perhaps that is why these stories endure. They remind us that knowledge without awe is empty, and that even in a world mapped by satellites, the heart still craves constellations. We are the children of both darkness and flame, and our oldest ritual continues, to question, to dream, and to listen for the whisper that never fades.